Now is a great time to play Sony PlayStation 1 games. Eight-bit joystick. The Sony PlayStation changed the world of video games when the system launched in Japan in 1994 and 1995 in the rest of the world. The PlayStation 1 was the first home game system to sell over 100 million consoles. There are so many phenomenal games for the PlayStation 1 that it blows one's mind. There were 7,918 PlayStation games released worldwide and 1,278 in North America alone. Normally in this series, I will pick 10 essential games that I would recommend that you start with, but with the PlayStation 1, I had increased the number of games to 20. I could have easily gone up to 30, 40, and even 50 games and not even start to exhaust the PlayStation 1's massive library. People are nostalgic for the PlayStation's late 90s era 3D graphics that were cutting edge at the time, but now come across as cozy and comfortable. 3D graphics in video games have advanced so much that it's so easy to forget that the PlayStation 1's launch represented a fundamental change in the industry with its ability to have 3D graphics as a primary content of the game. And it's also easy to get nostalgic for the great 2D games on the PlayStation 1. These are the 20 PlayStation 1 games that I would start with. Everyone is going to have different picks, and if you would have done this list differently, then let me know in the comments. But before that, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to this channel, and ring the bell so that you get notified for new videos. Now, on to the games. Crash Bandicoot. With Crash Bandicoot, developers Naughty Dog set out to make a quintessential PlayStation cartoon platform game that was inspired by 8-bit and 16-bit Super Mario Bros. It is a third-person perspective game with the virtual camera trailing behind Crash. As a result, the level layout and gameplay is a bit linear and successfully captures the feeling of playing a 16-bit cartoon platform game, but with interactive 3D graphics. By limiting the perspective, they were able to give their animation and characters more detail and life, and create some very tight platform jumping action. Crash Bandicoot quickly became a PlayStation mascot. The graphics are colorful and fun and do a great job of recreating the swash and stretch of classical hand-drawn animation. The game environments are lush and whimsical. Development of the game started long before they knew of Super Mario 64. Naughty Dog had only made a very poor 3DO fighting game at that point, and it was incredibly ambitious that they set out to make a platform game as good if not better than Mario, using a brand new platform, and they actually pulled it off. It became an instant classic and is beloved by millions of gamers. You absolutely should have the Crash Bandicoot games in your PlayStation 1 library. Wipeout XL, also known as Wipeout 2097. Wipeout XL, also known as Wipeout 2097 in Europe and Japan, is an amazing futuristic anti-gravity racing game developed by Psygnosis. It is the second in the Wipeout series and has a ton of improvement, weapons, and tracks. The soundtrack is one of the greatest techno albums ever made, and every track is a certified banger. It is a damn shame that I can't include any tracks in my videos at this point in my YouTube career. Wipeout XL has tight turns, steep inclines, and requires memorization and split-second reactions in order to succeed. Other racing games may be all about drifting, but Wipeout is all about air braking. Wipeout XL has an impressive visual graphic design perspective that really captures the late 90s rave flyer aesthetic cool. It all contributes to some great world building.
Wipeout is one of the best PlayStation franchises that just begs for a new edition on newer tech. By the way, the 3D graphics just do not look right on a modern TV, and they really come alive on a CRT TV. Psygnosis took what Nintendo started with F-Zero, and they made one of the greatest racing games ever made. The Wipeout series is amazing, and my favorite entry is Wipeout 2097 Wipeout XL. Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Castlevania Symphony of the Night is rightly considered to be one of the greatest 2D games ever created, and many people, including myself, consider it to be the greatest PlayStation 1 game ever made. It is the culmination of the perfect storm of creative professionals being given the budget and time to make the Metroidvania Castlevania game that they've always wanted to make, but were previously held back by technical limitations and time. The entire genre is beloved because of this game. It stars Alucard, the half-vampire son of Dracula, out to stop his father. It features homages and references to prior Castlevania games and is a direct continuation of the storyline of Castlevania Rondo of Blood. It features an intricate, ever-connected castle, non-linear gameplay, and a moody and memorable gothic rock soundtrack. Koji Igarashi and his team at Konami created what I consider to be peak 2D games ever created by Konami. It is timeless and brilliant. The 2D artwork and intricate gameplay will be fun and beloved for decades to come. If you can play this on original hardware, then you really must get it. Tekken 3. Tekken 3 is not only the third installment of the long-running 3D fighting franchise, but it is the most technically polished 3D fighting game on the PlayStation 1. It runs at a blistering frame rate, which is interlaced and looks a lot better on a CRT TV. It has an extensive roster of 32 characters that get more wacky and extensive the longer Tekken series gets. This version had a side-scrolling beat-em-up mode called Tekken Force, and it has the first appearance of the Tekken Ball volleyball combat game. The Tekken series was a prime example about how Namco became an arcade legend, the most prolific 8-bit Famicom developer, and successfully created one of the most beloved 3D fighting games known for fast combos and fluid animation. It is not the first 3D fighting game, but is one of the very best of best. Final Fantasy Tactics. Final Fantasy Tactics is the first major PlayStation 1 title by Squaresoft. And I say Square because that is what they were known by at the time before they merged with Enix. It is a turn-based combat strategy game with role-playing game elements from Final Fantasy, grid-based battlefields using 3D graphics, and glorious 2D hand-drawn sprite artwork. It has a complex story with incredibly well-developed characters that are fleshed out in a long cerebral plot involving war, politics, and religious discord. Come for the Final Fantasy-themed combat. Stay for the class consciousness philosophical diatribes railing against the church and the powerful. When Square was finally free of the limitations of cartridges, they really went all out and created a game, plot, and dialogue worthy of Leo Tolstoy, but with chocobos. The strategic combat was also really well thought out and very satisfying. There have been a couple of follow-ups on the Game Boy Advance, but there really haven't been anything like Final Fantasy Tactics. R4. Ridge Racer Type 4. Namco's Ridge Racer game series was first brought home on the PlayStation as one of the earliest game releases for the PlayStation, and actually helped prove what the system could actually do. The fourth game in the series combined arcade-style racing which was heavy on drifting with a light RPG storyline, or at least one-sided dialogue that is presented to you in between races. It has a refined graphic design aesthetic, and the cutest introductory movie with the Ridge Racer starting flag lady who became an impromptu series mascot as an unofficial virtual celebrity. The graphics are warm and comforting now, but were cutting edge, state-of-the-art at the time. Not to keep repeating myself. Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII. Final Fantasy VII isn't just a game. It was a game mega project that changed video games forever. It changed the game industry forever. It was the massive arcing story that caused Square to both give up on cartridges, but to also give up on Nintendo and to move to the PlayStation. The release of Final Fantasy VII was built up with demo discs, and I'm sure that there were people that purchased other Square games just to get the demo discs. It featured the Final Fantasy aesthetic rendered in 3D graphics with various levels of detail over pre-rendered incredibly detailed diorama-like backgrounds, and 3D combat, but with traditional but updated turn-based mechanics that could not only fit into a cartridge, it couldn't fit into one CD, and came in a box of 4 CDs. I also think it is best experienced and played on a CRT TV of the era. I think that younger gamers might be a little turned off by what is now the simpler 3D graphics, but you have to actually remember what 3D graphics were like in the 90s, and then it is one of the most rewarding experiences of your entire video game playing life. If Squaresoft just released Final Fantasy VII on the PlayStation and no other games, they still would have changed the entire game industry forever. Metal Gear Solid. Metal Gear Solid. What can I say that hasn't already been said? With Metal Gear Solid, artistic video game director Hideo Kojima was able to finally first realize the stealth action environment that he previously had attempted in prior games but was unable to pull off due to technical limitations. This is a game that changed the entire industry when it came out. With intricate and somewhat ranting storylines, top-notch voice acting, sneaking and stealth action, and puzzle solving, which has been combined into a video game experience that was previously unseen. This also pushed the PlayStation as far as it will go, and I actually think that this version of the game is best experienced rather than the modern ports on modern hardware. Metal Gear Solid and Castlevania Symphony of the Night were peak Konami. The company went off a cliff shortly afterwards, and it's best to experience what it was like before and shall never be like this again. Tobal No. 1. Square published several games that are not role-playing games on the PlayStation, including Tobal No. 1. It is an excellent one-on-one fighting game that opted for very little texture mapping, but the fluidity of the animation and the frame rate pushed 3D character animation on the PlayStation to a new level. It was also interlaced and potentially doesn't look right on modern TVs, but looks absolutely amazing on an old-school CRT, which I think is the correct way to play it. It featured new characters from Dragon Ball artist Akira Toriyama, who also worked with Square Enix on a little series called Dragon Quest. Tobal No. 1 is not as well known as other games on this list, but is absolutely worth checking out and is a quintessential PlayStation 1 experience. Parappa the Rapper. A PlayStation pick that never fails to put a smile on my face is Parappa the Rapper. It is the quintessential cartoon rapping game. I believe the name might be a reference to having the character graphics be paper thin. It featured animated 2D sprites that are completely flat but are being manipulated on top of 3D geometry that it uses to dance around. The graphic design is quite uniquely stylized and over the top. The rap tunes that you have to rap along to are absolutely funky flow and are original tunes that live rent-free in my head. There was a sequel on the PlayStation 2 and a sister game on the PlayStation 1, and it's a crying shame that they really haven't been anything like this in a very long time. The PlayStation 1 put the video game industry into an unprecedented boom, and a lot of very experimental games were allowed to flourish. If you've never played Parappa the Rapper, you really should check it out. It is fun for gamers of all ages. Yeah, I know, I gotta believe. Yeah, I know, I gotta redeem. Kick, punch, it's all in the mind. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 kicked off the extreme sports genre in the 90s and early 2000s. It is a refined follow-up to the original game, which was also on the PlayStation. Despite it being a console original, it actually featured arcade-style gameplay by having a 2-minute timer for you to explore a 3D level and perform as many skateboarding tricks as you can within the timer. It also had good physics, excellent animation, and great controls, and an excellent soundtrack, which, unfortunately, I cannot include in this YouTube video. It really was the introduction of skateboarding culture. This game also pushed 3D graphics on the PlayStation pretty far, and it's not only a very fun game, but it should be checked out as a technical achievement. Final Fantasy IX. Final Fantasy IX is probably one of my favorite Final Fantasy games. It features a unique cartoonish art style and world building, where they inhabit a world that includes both humans and animal creatures living side by side, and it's not important if someone is a rat, a pig, or a human person. Square built on the pre-rendered intricate diorama backgrounds of Final Fantasy VII and VIII, but rejected the modern sci-fi aspects of it. It feels like a good medieval Final Fantasy. The environments are lush, and the plot and characters are surprisingly well written and thought-provoking. There's all this attention about remaking Final Fantasy VII, but what I want to see is more Final Fantasy IX. As with other Squaresoft games of the era, it really looks good on a CRT TV. It's hard to believe that it's been 23 years since Final Fantasy IX came out, and it's been entirely too long. I need to consider playing from start to finish all over again. Final Fantasy IX gets my full endorsement, and I highly recommend that you check it out, especially if you don't like other Final Fantasy games. And if you do like other Final Fantasy games, then you will like it too. Crash Team Racing. Crash Team Racing is the best and closest thing that you're going to get to Super Mario Kart on the PlayStation. What it lacks in originality, it makes up for its excellent execution and overall sense of fun. The controls are tight and responsive. It features one of the best couch split-screen multiplayer experiences and a blistering cartoon frame rate. It has a very accessible, easy-to-learn learning curve, but allows for drifting, jumping, and boosting to bring about advanced gameplay techniques that you're only going to get through with repeated practice. Crash Team Racing is a little generic, but it is so good and so much fun. Bushido Blade. One of the absolute essential PlayStation experiences is Bushido Blade. It is a sword-fighting action game published by Square. That's right, the Final Fantasy people made another 3D fighting game that didn't involve any of their previous characters. It is a sword fighting game that's meant for people who really like sword fighting movies. The big difference about this and other games is that one good hit can be fatal and ends the match. Rather than doing Street Fighter special moves, there are high attacks, mid attacks, and low attacks, and a parry button. This is combined with 3 different regular stances, high stances, and low stances that provide a surprisingly in-depth choice of attacks when combined with context and awareness of your opponent. There is also a variety of traditional Japanese bladed weapons. Timing and positioning are crucial, and if you play this game with a friend who also knows how to play this game, they can go on for quite a long time until someone screws up and gets sliced up. Bushido Blade is a delightfully refreshing fighting game, and it received a sequel on the original PlayStation. I've always hoped that more people would discover this game, and I'm doing my part to include it on this list. Strider 2. When Capcom put together Strider 2 for PlayStation, they included an arcade-accurate port of not only Strider 2, but Strider 1 with an orchestrated soundtrack. Amusingly, there was a printing error in the North American version, and the Strider 1 disc is labeled as Strider 2, and vice versa. This game features a lot faster action and a wider vocabulary of actions than the original game that includes running, jumping, and special moves. The original Strider game is one of the most well-animated action arcade games, and this is a really excellent follow-up that most people don't know about. It features a really awesome hand-drawn two-dimensional sprite artwork, but on a 3D animated background. It is a perfect blend of polygon and pixels. It's sold over 1 million copies worldwide, but I don't remember this game being particularly popular in the US. I highly suggest that people rectify that and try out Strider 2 for PlayStation. Resident Evil 2. Capcom continued the Resident Evil Biohazard survival horror game series with Resident Evil 2. This featured a much larger setting than the first Resident Evil game and featured Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield trying to make their way through the zombie-infested Raccoon City. They really ratcheted up the tension by having limited resources and jump scares, as well as a well-written story with memorable characters. Resident Evil isn't just about fighting zombies, but rather getting through an environment filled with zombies and running when you need to and fighting when you need to. The edges on Resident Evil are a lot more well-rounded compared to the first game, and it is an excellent place to start the series that has been continued and remade to this day. There's just something about the low polygonal 3D horror that makes you need to use your imagination a little bit and makes it a lot more horrifying. Spyro the Dragon. Spyro the Dragon is a glorious open-world cartoon platform game featuring a flying dragon. It features a ton of charm and a colorful, expansive world. While the Crash Bandicoot series is known for really tight linear levels, Spyro, on the other hand, is open-ended, wide, and expansive. You can climb to a high place in the level and jump off and glide for very long distances. The characters are expressive, charming, and soothing. Spyro the Dragon is not out to try to be intellectually dense, but it is an enjoyable video game comfort food. If you want to kick back and play one of the best relaxing open-world cartoon platform games, it is an excellent place to start. It is the video game equivalent of macaroni and cheese, and I say that from the bottom of my heart. Sometimes you want something complex, and sometimes you just want to relax and have a bowl of comforting, cheesy goodness. And that is Spyro the Dragon. Tenchu Stealth Assassins. Tenchu Stealth Assassins is the first game in the Tenchu game series that is all about ninjas sneaking around in large sandbox levels and seeking out and assassinating specific targets, and to take them out by any means necessary. Rather than running in with swords drawn and being quickly overpowered, This game is all about sneaking around slowly and taking out guards and sentries slowly and methodically. If they don't see you coming, it is a very satisfying one-hit kill. Often, the corpses of your previous kills will set off alarms, and you need to take advantage of the 3D environments to drop down and take out the enemy guards like a deadly spider. The Tenchu game series is one of the best stealth action experience, and it's got its start right here on the PlayStation 1. Gran Turismo 2. The Gran Turismo series got its start on the PlayStation 1 and marked a shift from arcade racing games to more realistic driving simulations. It featured a huge selection of real licensed cars and real-world locations and realistic physics that attempted to recreate the driving experiences of said cars. It shipped on 2 discs, while the first one was an arcade-style racing game. Gran Turismo 2 had a career mode which functioned as a de facto role-playing game where you would race cars, learn how to drive them better, and unlock customization options. This created a lucrative gameplay loop which then continued on every single iteration of the PlayStation until the current day. The first game was quite good, but the second one was where the Gran Turismo series started being the automotive simulation racing games that continues to have massive fans today. Twisted Metal 2. It sounds strange to call Twisted Metal 2 a party game, but it is an over-the-top vehicular combat game where you drive around searching for other drivers to blow them up and crush them. It features a split-screen mode and has some of the best on-the-couch 2-player combat by splitting the screen vertically. There is also a 1-player mode, but the 2-player mode is where it's at. The graphics come across as a little simplistic these days, but it really has an over-the-top 90s level of extreme violence with low-resolution textures. One of the advantages of the on-the-couch competitive multiplayer is that you get to hear your friends exclaim profanities when you blow them up. It's hard to think that I would become nostalgic for low-polygonal vehicular violence. It is a vehicular last man standing Mad Max free-for-all with guns. It's like the balloon mode in Mario Kart, but much more violent. Very 90s and very, very PlayStation.
Why play PlayStation 1 games now? The PlayStation family of game system continues to delight millions of gamers all over the world, even today. Demographic shift. With the PlayStation, Sony brought about a demographic shift to the world of video games when Sony went after the young adult demographic right when the generation of gamers that played 8-bit and 16-bit Nintendo systems entered their 20s. Sega started off trying to go after the young adult market with the Genesis and the Mega Drive, but Sony effectively captured the hearts and minds of 20-somethings and teenagers. With the PlayStation, video games became cool. Video games became something that everyone should do, not just kids. 3D and CDs. Sony had also made an incredible value proposition to developers by having games on quick and easy to manufacture CDs that had a much higher profit margin and less financial risk due to a greatly reduced manufacturing cost compared to cartridges. Cartridges were slow to make and required a huge investment of money up front. Publishers were literally risking the company in making cartridges. Game developers could have much larger games, but had to have them structured to run at CD-ROM access speeds. 3D acceleration was built into the PlayStation, and the development kits allowed game developers to not have to reinvent the wheel in order to make 3D game engines on the PlayStation. That allowed game makers to make great 3D games with less effort and not have to do it all from scratch. A combination of 3D graphics and CDs as a format was a one-two punch, and third-party developers put out thousands of quality PlayStation 1 games. With the PlayStation, Sony became the masters of cultivating and encouraging the best third-party development in the world. They really focus on making their platform the best place for other companies to make their games, both from a technical standpoint and also a financial publishing standpoint. Another core strength of the PlayStation was second-party development. Sony would buy companies and direct them to make quality PlayStation games, but they were allowed to have their own corporate culture and functioned with an unprecedented amount of independence. PlayStation dominated the competition and outsold other game systems by a ridiculous margin. Nintendo was on the market with the N64, and Sega had the Sega Saturn, but it's hard to overstate just how dominant and overwhelming the sales lead that Sony was able to muster with the Sony PlayStation. The PlayStation also took out NEC, 3DO, and Atari and knocked them out of the video game industry market altogether. By the way, I want to go on record and state that I think PlayStation 1 games look a lot better on a CRT TV. They often feature pre-rendered cutscenes and backgrounds with the blending and blurring of a real cathode ray tube will present the graphics as they were originally intended. There are HDMI options, but I think both 2D and 3D games look much better on a CRT TV. And now is a great time to pick up a CRT TV while you still can. You don't even have to get a very high-end one. Any free CRT TV that you can find in your area is going to be a much more realistic, authentic PlayStation experience than having it hooked up to a modern TV via HDMI. A CRT is what the games for the PlayStation 1 were designed for. PlayStation 1 controllers. Originally, the PlayStation 1 featured 4 buttons, like the Super Nintendo, but added L1 and L2 in addition to the L and R buttons on the top of the controller. The 4 main buttons were changed to a square, circle, triangle, and X or cross. In Japanese culture, circle means pass or okay, and cross means back or fail. So many PlayStation game menus feature circle going forward and X going back, and some games changed this when they were localized to the West. The PlayStation controller was updated after a couple years and added dual analog sticks and rumble, the DualShock controller as it became known over the years from the PlayStation 1, all the way to the current PlayStation 5. Very few games require a DualShock controller, but getting one is a pretty safe bet. Also, don't forget to get a PlayStation 1 memory card. You're going to need it to save your games. Hardware options. You don't even have to get a PlayStation 1 system to enjoy the PS1 library of games. Every model of PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation 3 are both 100% backwards compatible and can handle every single PlayStation 1 game disc from that region. For a long while, Sony sold a wide number of PlayStation 1 games as digital downloads on the PSN Store, and you could play them on the PlayStation 3, the PlayStation Portable, and the PS Vita. The PSN Store is still open on the PlayStation 3, but the selection of games available has been greatly reduced. You can still use a web browser to add money to your PSN account to buy PlayStation 1 games on PSN. They are a remarkably good deal, and I would encourage you to do it while you still can. Differences in hardware. Even if you want to play on original PlayStation hardware, there is some variety. There were multiple versions of the original gray PlayStation design with differences in audio-visual hookups. And then there was a later PS1 model with a greatly reduced size and cute rounded design. And if you're going to buy original hardware, definitely check to see how well the disk drive works these days, because even when the PlayStation was new, they were known for having some optical drive failures. Optical drive emulators and PlayStation console emulation. There are also several PlayStation optical drive emulators out there that allow you to run PlayStation 1 disc images off SD cards using a modified original system. Many modern emulation platforms, such as RetroPie and handheld emulation devices, have no problem emulating a PlayStation 1. I love playing PS1 games on my Mu Mini Plus. No matter how you play them, there are a ton of awesome PlayStation 1 games. I just barely scratched the surface on the PlayStation 1. In future videos, I need to go over even more PlayStation games and start the list with more obscure ones that really put a smile on my face. This is 8-Bit Joystick. Stay awesome. Play retro.